Hello, I'm Areva Martin, and welcome to the special report. Today, we're talking about media consolidation. Who really controls the story? The media landscape is shrinking. Local newsrooms are being gutted, and tech billionaires and foreign entities are buying legacy outlets. Like the current talk about the possibility of Saudi Arabia purchasing Warner Brothers. Yes, Saudi Arabia purchasing Warner Brothers, with a handful of corporations controlling what billions of people see, hear, and believe. What does this mean for democracy, for truth, for communities of color that have long relied on independent media to tell our stories when no one else would? Today, we're getting into it with two of my friends who happen to be some of the best in the business. He's a veteran media executive whose career spans major networks and digital platforms from CNN to ESPN, NFL Media, and ABC News. When it comes to understanding how decisions get made in corporate media and how consolidation impacts creativity, representation, and audiences, there's no other trusted voice than Galen Gordon, and I am so happy he's joining us. He's one of the sharpest minds in the business. So, Galen, welcome to the special report. So excited to have you. Galen used to produce me on some shows, so it's really interesting and I would say exciting for me to be interviewing him, particularly about this topic. And joining us along with Galen is my good friend, attorney Arthur educator and DEI expert Fatimah Gilliam. You've seen her lots of times joining me on the special report, breaking down all of today's hottest headlines. So let's just jump right into this, Galen and Fatimah. This is scary. Scary for those like you and I, Galen, that remember when there were a handful of broadcast networks, there was a handful of cable networks that pretty much delivered the news. And many of them were trusted sources. People could rely that they on these sources, that they were getting it straight. But now, with all of these stations consolidating, and just a couple of weeks ago, the news of layoffs at these major stations, what do you make of all of this?
It's just a new era of where we are in journalism, storytelling, all of that. I think you might have used the word scary. It's certainly different from when I started 30 years ago, 31 years ago, believe it or not, as a journalist for a newspaper back in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when newspapers were very much a thing. It's just different in terms of how people are consuming content, how people are receiving content, how many sources of news outlets, objective news outlets, were out there compared to where we are today. It's a different time, and it's a time that's responding to the evolution of how consumers want and demand content, and we all have to make that adjustment, but also sort what's true and what's not.
So, Galen, I know when I started in the media, we didn't think much, or definitely didn't talk much about who owned the stations. We just assumed they were owned, I don't know, by some entrepreneur, some business entity, some maybe venture capital firm. But now we know as consumers, there's so much information online about ownership, and we're learning that so many of these stations are owned by the same individual or the same family in some instances. What does that mean for what happens inside those newsrooms when you have a family controlling two or three major outlets?
Well, for a while, it didn't. There wasn't a concern to. There wasn't a concern about the news being objective because ultimately everyone believed in the Fourth Estate and the responsibility to truth. But lately, but by lately, I say within the last 8 to 10 years, with the political landscape being what it is, and having a president that coined the term, if I can use that, fake news. It's harder for individuals to figure out what's true and what is not. To your question about individual families, Rupert Murdoch owned Fox and a lot of newspapers, and there was still a responsibility to truth in storytelling. Now the lines are blurred in many ways, from not just the traditional organizations being owned, but by the rise of influencers, for lack of a better term. No, a real term, for the rise of influencers, people that have an audience that don't have the journalistic background that I may have had, or you may have. And so, yeah, there's a real concern about how people are consuming content, how they're um, integrating content in their day-to-day life and making decisions off that content.
And so, Fatima, when I think about diversity, when I look at the MS Now, which is the news station, MSNBC has cut ties with NBC Universal, and now they are their own separate entity, and they have some ads that are running, and there are not a lot of people of color in these ads. So this is not just impacting the people behind the scenes at stations. When we look across the landscape in terms of who is reporting the news, there have been a lot of changes. What do you make of those changes, and how is it going to impact audiences of color?
Well, I think it's nothing good. I mean, when Skydance bought Paramount, which controls CBS News, and Barry Weiss came in, they've been doing layoffs, but they've also gotten rid of a lot of top news journalists that are people of color, women of color, and the like. Some of my core concerns with what's happening in the media landscape with this consolidation is, those who own the forum own the conversation. And when you have a handful of companies that own the airwaves, they can gerrymander the boundaries of political and public debate. They can expand from censorship into political coercion and dominance, and that is what we see going on. And so we're having this blurring of the lines as they buy more companies, as they expand into different vertical and horizontal markets. That means that you can blur the lines between news, media, entertainment, social media, technology, privacy, surveillance, security, and government, right? So we're talking about corporate consolidation that is necessary for authoritarianism to flourish, right? It's the magnification of media. It is where culture, it's the magnification of media and culture, and that you're going to end up having propaganda becoming policy. And in particular, I'm especially concerned, people talk about the rise of the Murdoch family. Yes, they are problematic, but I am, in this moment, very concerned with what's happening with the Ellison family, right? So the Larry Ellison, who owns Oracle, right? So his son starts Skydance, and he has a bottomless pit of money because Larry Ellison is the second richest person in the world behind Elon Musk. So they buy Paramount, right, which controls BET, Comedy Central, CBS, a whole bunch of properties. Now they want to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, which owns HBO and CNN. And you also have Larry Ellison in the group of people, the lead person who's going to buy TikTok. He's going to possibly buy TikTok with Lachlan Murdoch of Fox, right? The Murdoch family, where they're going to put possibly Barron Trump, who, what job has that man ever had? I don't know, what is he, 20 years old, on the board of TikTok. So what I'm talking about is where you're having too much power being consolidated. So, in the 1980s, 50 companies owned 90% of the media market. Now 5 companies own 90% of the media market. And if Warner Brothers is purchased by the Ellison family, then that's going to go down to 4 companies. And I'll just give you a couple quick other data points before I stop talking. There are 10 companies that own 1/4 of U.S. newspapers, and 3 conglomerates control 40% of local TV news. That is why there was the whole problem with Jimmy Kimmel. There's too much consolidation, which brings it back to those who own the forum own the conversation. And that means
I'm glad you brought up, and I'm glad, Fatima, you brought up Jimmy Kimmel, because Galen, that was going to be the next question I was going to ask you about is, with this consolidation, when you have 4 or 5 entities owning the majority of all news outlets, how powerful, if any, are these anchors? I mean, it used to be, again, in the day, a $10 million, $20 million a year anchor had a lot of control at one of these organizations. I mean, they could dictate a lot about what stories got told, how those stories were told. But now, with the consolidation, do you see anchors, even those highly paid anchors, still having that power? Can they push back on stories that they're being asked to report on? Can they push back on, the point of view that's expected to be articulated as they tell those stories?
I think so. I certainly think so. And the main reason why they are, 10 or $20 million dollar paid anchors, as you say, is because they bring audience. And when you lose that anchor, then you lose part of the audience. And so when you have that influence over a day part over how many people come to your product, come to your platform, if you will. Yeah, I certainly think you have the opportunity to push back on stories or to influence the news of the day. So now the concern is not for those that are making the top dollar in the industry. The concern is for those that aren't making those top dollars and their ability to influence and tell stories.
Was this inevitable, Galen? When we look at the landscape and the rise of social media, people aren't, viewing TV in the same way they did 10, 20 years ago. The appointment television era is pretty much over. If I can get the same news on my phone 24/7, I can get it in snippets from TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, then I don't have to watch a 60-minute news program. Some visionary folks, entrepreneurs, business people, journalists had to see this coming. So was this consolidation kind of inevitable as we moved into the world of social media and streaming?
I think so, because look, at the end of the day, content is content, right? And so it's just the ease in which people can receive content is what's having impact on the business. 15 years ago, people didn't mind going to the corner store and grabbing a newspaper and reading it and and all that. Now they can get it online, right? Appointment television, in terms of, let's say, your morning news programs, the consumer can now watch that whenever they want. Right. And so whereas some companies can guarantee a certain audience at a certain time, others may not. And so the monetization of that quote unquote time period has changed and altered as people choose to watch news when they want to watch news and not necessarily at the quote unquote appointed time when you have it. Don't get me wrong, it's still impactful and still very much necessary, but how you monetize that has certainly changed based on demand and when people want and choose, or how they choose to consume said content.
So, Fatima, Galen says that, highly paid anchors still have some control. They can still push back on stories because they control the audiences, and audiences bring the dollars to these networks, to these streamers, or to any platform. Do you agree with that? Do you think that because media personalities, highly paid anchors do still have a great deal of sway over the audiences, that they do have that autonomy to push back to the Larry Ellisons of the world?
I disagree with that respectfully. I mean, I think that the media landscape is changing and the power dynamics are shifting. And I think the day of anchors getting $15-20 million a year is dying on the vine, which is why they're diversifying and doing like more public events and a whole bunch of other things. You know, people get their news more from social media. 54% of people get their news from social media. That's now surpassed television. That means that's going to be a shift in power. And if you look at when Barry Weiss, who's now running CBS News, who has never run a TV network, or she's not even an investigative journalist, she's just an opinion writer. Now that she's running CBS, they've already been pushing people to quiet down, to not push back against Trump, to not push back against the president. And she has very strong ideological views that are coming out in the reporting that's taking place. And I have no doubt it's going to come out and who gets to remain there. Yes, people have power because they have followers, but that could be ripped from under people. Look at Joy Reid. I mean, they claimed that she had low ratings, but she didn't. I looked at the ratings, right? She had higher ratings than some of her colleagues that are still at MSNBC, now MS Now, right? It's just that they didn't like what she was talking about. Right? They didn't like what Mehdi Hassan was talking about when he got pushed out of MSNBC and now runs Zateo. So you have people now leaving and creating their own platforms like Don Lemon. So what that signals is people who were paid very high amounts were pushed out, and the mainstream landscape was unavailable to them in the same way if they were going to speak freely. That is the shift that is taking place. And that is why I'm deeply concerned with media consolidation, because it means it's a platform for propaganda and not just for news. So if somebody is controlling CBS, but then they're also controlling Paramount, so that'll be what shows up on our streaming network, what kind of movies we see, what kind of TV we see, what kind of programming. And then it's also the same family that's going to own TikTok, your social media platform, where they've been very clear that there are certain things that they don't want you talking about, basically Israel, then that is going to show up on the platform as well.
And that you raise a great point, because look at what happened with Twitter, X, when Elon Musk took over. So a lot of the safeguards that were in place when the platform wasn't owned by Musk, in terms of the prohibition against hate speech that was on the platform, some of the fact checking that was critical, all that went out the window. We remember, Elon Musk came in and took a saw, a sledgehammer as it is, to many of those departments that were responsible for ensuring that the content on the platform adhered to certain standards, although it wasn't, as high standards as some other journalistic platforms, but clearly there were some checks and balances in place. And then when Elon Musk took it over, those went out the window. I mean, we see Donald Trump every day on his own platform, his Truth Social. But remember, there was a big thing when he was kicked off of Twitter. So I am concerned, Galen, about even some of those highly paid anchors. One, as Fatimah said, remaining in those positions, and two, having any kind of control. Because if Fatimah's numbers are right, and 54% of people are getting their news from social media, not from ABC, NBC, CBS, then as a business proposition, why would they even pay somebody 10 or 20 million? Because there's only going to be so much of an audience that I can grab, no matter how dynamic and how great that anchor is.
Look, I certainly don't disagree with the fact that the days of the highly paid anchor, those days are numbered in a sense, and that's just again just based off of the business model in and of itself. Do I think that? And I don't want to name names, but do I think that certain anchors have influence over some of the some of the stories that they, as they should? Yes, I do. But that doesn't mean that that there's corporate interests that might conflict with that. We've seen that, right? I don't disagree with that whatsoever. So no, I do think that the talent at some of these networks that are making top dollar, they are there for a reason, and the primary reason is they bring audience, which by extension bring dollars.
Right. So Fatimah, the FCC rarely blocks mergers. We see antitrust enforcement is inconsistent under Trump, is pretty much non-existent, to be truthful. So, what reforms do you think would actually address some of these issues that come about as a result of consolidation? Not likely that we're going to see them under a Trump administration, but I think we have to be prepared for this issue. And as we're, facing the midterms, asking our representatives that are asking for our vote, what are their opinions, and what do they see as solutions to ensuring that we don't end up with one company? You say there are 5, possibly going to be 4. We could literally end up with one billionaire, trillionaire family owning all of our media, and it becoming pretty much state-run media.
Well, I think those are all very strong possibilities. I mean, it is unfortunate that we don't have somebody like Lena Khan, who used to run the Federal Trade Commission, who was very aggressive in coming after companies for antitrust regulations and violations. What we need is strong enforcement from the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, right? So that mergers like this are not allowed to go through, and then breaking up some of these larger companies. I mean, I'm very concerned when, especially as I mentioned before, the Ellison family, because it isn't just that we're talking about a family that is controlling, the news, the TV, the movies, then it's going to be social media. But you also have to look at, who is Larry Ellison? He owns Oracle. Right? That's cloud computing, right? That's where, we don't think about it. It's that unsexy work that has to happen at the back end with cloud computing and data storage. But we're talking about somebody who has access to probably all of our information, because he does cloud storage for governments and he does it for major corporations. Everybody does something every day that touches with Oracle. And the reason why I think it is important is because we're also talking about somebody who believes in the concept of the surveillance state. Think that film Minority Report. He has said that he believes that, having that kind of surveillance will make us all, quote, better citizens. So we're talking about somebody who has that kind of power, but then is also going to control the news platform, the information platform that's shaping policy and also will push some propaganda. So what I think is necessary is not just coming for these companies for antitrust regulations, but I also think we need to start forming alternative pathways to connect with people, to inform people, because the current platforms are not going to get people the information that they need to understand what's happening. What they're going to get is propaganda, and more BS propaganda.
So it's so interesting as we're talking about state control media and the possibility of us getting there. Trump wants Seth Meyers fired, and he's been unapologetic in making that known. He's posted about it on social media. Now the FCC chair is amplifying that message, and we know that Trump has been going after many of the late night comics because they, speak truth to power about him and his administration. And now Trump is also calling to revoke ABC's license over what he's calling, some of the ABC reporters' questions about Epstein. So I don't think we can ignore what Donald Trump says on social media or his calls for, certain personalities to be fired, comedians to be fired. We also have to take seriously when he goes after a network like ABC. He went after CBS, and he got a big fat payday in terms of a settlement. He got Barry Weiss basically out of that deal, Fatimah, that settlement with CBS to get that Skydance merger approved through the FCC. He was able to exert a tremendous amount of power. So if that's CBS, what might happen, Galen, to ABC if Trump is upset about the reporters' questions to him over Epstein?
Well, Trump is going after other reporters and other networks. We've seen it at CNN. We've seen it happen at ABC News as well. Disney, he called, Kimmel was pulled off the air for a few days, and then after 3 or 4 days, Kimmel was back on the air, which was a good thing. In the sense that Disney was able to resolve their internal conversations about what's right and what's wrong about the issue. Disney consumers also spoke with their dollars in terms of, if you're going to allow this, then we don't have to give you our dollars. And I think at the end of the day, that ultimately brought Kimmel and programming back to the table. So we've seen with this administration that he is not shy about going after the media, and he has I don't want to use the word wins, but he has managed to influence some networks more so than others, which is a concern.
Wow, I love Jimmy Kimmel, Fatimah, and I love Seth Meyers. What are you thinking about in this moment when we did watch basically Jimmy Kimmel be taken off the air, and now the president going after Seth Meyers?
To me, this is all about censorship, right? This is about freedom and democracy, and whether or not people have the ability to speak freely, to speak their mind, to say whatever they want to about people in power. So when you have this level of consolidation, and then it's blurring the lines and overlapping with government, this is where you have propaganda becoming policy. This is where it's influencing what people think. And that in turn is going to influence how people see themselves in society and their relationship to it, and therefore how they vote. So to me, this is all very dangerous. This is why I said before that corporate consolidation is necessary for authoritarianism to take root and for it to flourish, because this is what happens. This is what Viktor Orban did in Hungary with taking control over the media. This is what happened with Modi in India, right? You have these dictator types, these authoritarian types, and they take over the media, they influence the media. And Trump is being successful. That is why you had these, frivolous lawsuits that were against ABC, that were against CBS, that ended up being settled, giving money to Trump when they could have won in court. That is because they are fearful. They are bending the knee. And so these are very dangerous times that people need to be paying attention to who is saying what and who is controlling what. And just to add an additional note for people that are, listening and watching, for them to understand who Bari Weiss is, because we've mentioned her before, but haven't explained who she is. So she used to work for the New York Times as an opinion writer, right? And never an investigative journalist, and decided to leave because she was very upset with wokeism and DEI. And so then she left complaining about DEI and wokeism and became the darling of the MAGA side, and got propped up with her platform called the Free Press, which is, you can, a lot of that stuff isn't even factual, and it's just lies and propaganda a lot of times. And to be able to bring her into the CBS family, the Ellison family through Skydance paid her $150 million to acquire her the Free Press podcast, and she's bringing her ideology into CBS. So these are very important and dangerous things that people need to pay attention to, but it's also about, are we having democracy flourish? Are we having free speech? Are they violating civil rights? People should be able to complain about anybody they want and say whatever they want, as long as it is truthful. Right? They can have opinions about people, but Trump has thin-skinned. It's like a typical bully. They want to knock you around, push you around, but the moment you push back, they can't handle it, and they act out like a petulant little baby. And that's what we have. We have a boy baby in the White House, and he's taking his ideology for the world, lining up with billionaires, and wants that to become policy and influence whether or not we can be free Americans.
Yeah, the issue here is all about First Amendment rights. I mean, the fact that we are having to have this conversation, the fact that someone sitting in the White House is calling for a station to lose its license because a reporter asked a question that they don't like is, I think, beyond anything we could have ever imagined, that we would be at this point where it's not just a consolidation of these networks and stations. It is those that aren't necessarily even seeking anything before the FCC, and these kinds of threats about revoking your license. We saw it with NPR. We've seen it with PBS. We've seen it with so many networks that have been targeted by this administration, and these corporate owners, the shareholders, the owners, some are running scared and some are capitulating, as you said, Fatimah. So this is a very scary time, and people definitely need to be aware. They need to be woke. There's a reason that wokeism is important. Being aware is what we're talking about. And if you want to call it being woke, then so be it. Be woke, be aware, be knowledgeable, be informed about what's happening, because when you're watching a network, when you're watching a news show, when you're watching a program, you need to understand what went into the production of that show and what kind of pressure may be brought to bear on many of those who are in positions who rightfully so don't want to lose their jobs, don't want to be fired, don't want to be laid off, don't want to be targeted either internally by the corporations or externally by this administration. Wow, this is a really, really interesting conversation.
An interesting
not
time.
going anywhere.
Agree.
Ahead,
I was going to say, an interesting time, and just think about those that have been part of the traditional media that have their own outlets now, right? And just think about the responsibility they have, especially those that were former, let's say, network anchors, right? Still journalists, right? Think about the responsibility that they have on their own respective platforms. And I'm saying that they're not being responsible, but think about the enormous responsibility, the truth that they have on their platforms when they're going out, talking about and sharing the news of the day, right? It's a really, truly, again, I've used the word scary, but it is a time where it's like you have to wake up. Like, this is the time, the day and age that we're living in, where there's a lot of content out of there, and people need to know how to separate what's true and what's not.
And let's be clear, Galen and Fatimah, you named Don Lemon and Joy Reid, but there are many on the right who were working with Fox and some of the other conservative networks who are no longer with those big networks and have their own platforms as well, where they are doing daily reports on hot topics and politics and the economy. And many of them have huge, huge followings. I'm thinking of Megyn Kelly, for one, Tucker Carlson. These are folks who used to be at Fox, who now have their own independent platforms. So this isn't just happening to those, on the left. It's happening on the right too. So folks have to understand, when you watch the news, whether you're watching it on a broadcast station, whether you're watching it on cable or on your phone, you've got to ask again, who are you watching and what is their motive? What is their agenda? Because a lot of these people clearly have an agenda. I just want to say this conversation hits at the core of democracy, because we know media isn't just about stories. It's about power. And when power goes unchecked and becomes concentrated, when too few hands hold too much influence, people suffer, facts suffer, communities suffer. And see, this isn't just some abstract policy debate that we're having. I want everyone watching to think about this in its simplest form. Media consolidation determines whether a family knows a factory is polluting their neighborhood. Something as simple as that. Do you know what company is in your neighborhood? Do you know what they're doing to your neighborhood? Media helps us understand what's happening in the voting world, whether voters hear the truth about what's on the ballot. We saw that right here in California, the way that Prop 50 was distorted by ads were played over and over again, distorting what Prop 50 was all about. Media tells us when there is a missing child, when there's a missing adult, and we've seen missing white woman syndrome. When a white woman goes missing, the intensity at which that story is reported over and over again versus when Black women or Black children go missing. All of that is about media. All of that is about media consolidation. But we don't ever end the special report on a gloomy note. We end it on a positive. So here is the good news. We meaning the people, meaning the citizens, the voters, we aren't powerless. We can support independent media. We've talked about some of those independent media outlets. We can demand transparency from tech giants. Fatimah's named one of those tech giants that we can, say, hey, we need to know more about what you're doing and who you're doing it with. We can push our lawmakers. The midterms are coming up. People are going to be asking us for money. They're asking us for votes. They're asking us to volunteer for their campaigns. So we need to be asking them some questions. What are you going to do if you are elected as it relates to this media consolidation? Are you going to rubber stamp what's already happening with regards to these mergers, or are you going to elevate diverse voices? Are you going to demand more accountability and transparency from media outlets? Democracy depends on an informed public, and that's what we do at the Special Report every day, is try to keep people informed. And a truly informed public depends on not just my voice or Fatimah's or Galen's or Joy Reid or Don Lemon. It depends on all voices. So it's so important, folks. Get plugged in, get locked in, get tuned in to this issue, because it is a matter of what you know, what you should know, and what you want to know to make sure that you are doing everything you can to fight for, stand up for, and support our democracy. I'm Areva Martin, and thank you so much to Galen. Thank you so much, Fatimah, for lending your voices on this so important topic. We're going to stay on this and keep talking about the media and keep talking about how you can get trusted voices, how you can make sure you're listening to trusted voices. Stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, I say to you, stay in this fight, because I need you and we all need you. If you want more information about the Special Report, follow me across all social platforms at Areva Martin. Subscribe to my YouTube page and share the Special Report.
Calling all BIPOC college students, recent college graduates, and clinicians. Here's my story about CORE, a unique workforce development program that is changing lives. My brother is the most caring person you'll ever meet. With his autism diagnosis, my family had to fight to make sure that the resources he deserved were available. That's why my goal has always been to help children with developmental disabilities and give them chances my brother may have missed. So when I heard about the CORE Fellowship, I knew immediately it was for me. The fellowship opens doors for myself and others like me. They offer training, a stipend while you're learning, job placement, and they'll pay up to $10,000 of my student loan debt. The CORE Fellowship is going to allow me to achieve my life's purpose. They care about me, so I can care about others, like my brother. Visit the website to learn more about the CORE Fellowship. Discover your core passion, your power, and your purpose. Apply today.